Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Aubrey. I'm so happy to have you all here with me today. So today I have a few book recommendations for you, but these are going to be a little different. We are actually going to go over some books that I've read that made me cry. So I have mentioned before, I think that I'm a very character-driven reader. I get very attached to characters, also in TV shows and movies. But so when bad things are happening to characters that I care about, I do tend to cry. I cry very easily. I get very emotional. So I have a few books today that while I was reading them, they did make me cry, whether that was like just a little tear or full on sobbing. And today we're going to go over specifically some standalone books. So I think I'll do another video in the future of some book series that made me cry, but just in case you're looking for anything, you need a little emotional catharsis, or you are just in the mood to be sad, or some of these you just really want such heartwarming content that it's going to hit you right in the emotions. That's what we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first one that I have here, I read in 2020, I think it was. Because I remember sitting on the staircase. We were feeding this stray cat in our neighborhood who was pregnant. We were trying to she was not getting enough food, and so we were leaving food out for her and trying to earn her trust. And we ended up taking her in. We ended up not being able to keep her just because she was so terrified. So she's with a rescue. But we do have 3 of her kids. But anyway, I remember sitting on the staircase in my house in front of the front door, waiting for her. We called her Miette, waiting for her to come to eat. And I was reading this book and I was just crying hysterically. So the first book is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. I know that they've made a movie for this. Since then, I have not yet seen it. I'm a little nervous to see it. But essentially in this book, we are in the middle of World War II. And we're following 2 characters. One of them is a young girl named Marie Laure LeBlanc. And I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce French names. So if I butchered that, I apologize. But we follow her. She is a young girl living in Paris, I think it is. Yes, in Paris with her father, who works at the Museum of Natural History. And Marie is actually going blind due to a genetic condition that she has. So she is slowly losing her sight, like it's a progressive condition. So her father works at the Museum of Natural History. He is actually a very, very talented locksmith. He can build locks. He can break into locks. And so he is, and I'm so sorry, my voice is suffering a little bit this week, so I apologize if I sound scratchy at all. But so Marie's father is this very talented locksmith who works at the Museum of Natural History. And so we're following her and her father, and when the Nazi party starts to invade France, they actually flee to this little island, Saint Malo, where Marie's great uncle lives. So they're going to live with him, and it's this little island that's like walled. The city is like walled off, so they're hoping that they'll be safer there. And when they flee, her father is entrusted with something very special from the museum that he is supposed to take with him and protect. So we're following Marie's perspective, and then we also follow the perspective of a little boy who is growing up in Nazi Germany in a coal mining town, and his name is Werner Pfennig. He's an orphan. He has a younger sibling, and their parents actually died in the mine in a coal mining accident. And so he knows that his fate is going to be sent into these mines, but he is very, very talented with radios. He's really good at fixing them, repairing them. He kind of is, that's like his passion. He loves radios. He thinks that they're so cool and interesting. And so he gets noticed by some Nazi soldiers, higher ups. He is entered into this training program, and it's kind of like we're following, in his perspective, you're seeing someone who doesn't really understand the war because he's put into it so young on the side of the aggressors. He doesn't really understand the horrendous tragedies that they are like perpetuating. all he sees for himself is this opportunity to have potentially a better life and to make a better life for his younger sibling by earning money for them and not having to go into this mine that he is so desperately terrified of because that is where his parents died. So Werner gets put into the Nazi party. He is like working on the radios. And so we're following these two perspectives, and radio plays a big part in this. But I don't want to spoil anything else, like what happens or what's going on. That's just kind of the general like synopsis of the setup. But let me just tell you, you get to see the war from the perspectives of these two children, these two very, very young people who are being kind of forced into these situations they have no control over, really. Even Werner, like, yes, he has become part of the Nazi party, but he doesn't really understand. And it is so emotional seeing the tragedy and the heartbreak and seeing these two young people try to figure out what's going on and what to do. And Maria's just trying to live her life, and she has this debilitating condition that is taking away her sight slowly and slowly, and all she wants to do is read books and enjoy her life, and she's losing her sight. And then we have Werner, who is I'm gonna like tear up thinking about it, but this book is just so emotional. It is so heartbreaking, and so much of it is about this idea of like, we are all still human, even those of us who are doing terrible things. And you know, the difference in perspectives and the difference in like level of knowledge, because people were being taken advantage of on both sides of this. Like Werner was put into this so young, and is suddenly being confronted with these awful things and is trying to reconcile that with what he's been told by the people he's supposed to be able to trust. And it's so good, and it's so heartbreaking, and it will just leave you crying your eyes out, just wanting these two kids to be okay and to be happy. And it's just, and then the ending, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's just so emotional, so emotional. It's all about just human connection and this idea that we're different, but are we so different? Are we as different as we're being told that we are? And it's just so good. It is so good. If you want to cry, this is the book that you need to read. It will break your heart. It is historical fiction. There's nothing in here about like fantasy, sci-fi. It is just historical fiction, no magic. It is so good. I cannot recommend this book enough, but do be aware that you're going to need some tissues. Don't go into this expecting it to be sunshine and roses. All right, the second book on this list is technically a standalone, but it is one of those books that is part of like a wider world or a wider universe. But within that universe, this book is itself like a standalone within that universe, even though it's connected in some ways to the other series and other books there. But I'm counting it in this list, partly because it's the only one that I've read so far out of this like greater series of books. So we're going to count it. But that is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in his Cosmere. And I just recently read this year, and it's... I was expecting to like it. I've never read Brandon Sanderson before, so I think I was a little surprised just by how good it was. I mean, I've heard so much praise for Brandon Sanderson, but I always hear people talking about like Mistborn or the Stormlight Archive. I never really hear people talking about Elantris. And y'all, it was so good. Oh, it was so good. So in this book, we follow Prince Rauden, who is the prince of, what is this, the city's name? Oh no. Arelon. So, and he wakes up one morning and he has been taken by the Shaod, which is what turns you into an Elantrian. So the Elantrians were these beings of great power and magic. They were immortal. They could still die and be killed, but I think that they didn't die of old age, perhaps. Think like Tolkienian elves as an example. But the Shaod could take anyone who was in Arelon and could turn you into an Elantrian, and it typically happens at night, so you wake up the next morning and it's happened. And again, Elantrians were beautiful, they were powerful, they controlled this magic that nobody else could control. But then suddenly, something called the Rayod happens, and the Rayod essentially destroyed the Elantrians. It turned them into these very sickly creatures. They're basically dead while still being alive. And so now the Shaod or Shoud is considered a curse. So Raoden has been taken by the Shoud, and he wakes up and is thrown into the city of Elantris, which is kind of where all of the Elantrians are quarantined. And we also follow the Princess of Teod, which is a neighboring kingdom named Serene, who is on her way to marry Raoden and does not know what has happened to him. And we also have another perspective who I'm not really going to talk about because I don't want to spoil anything, but there is another kingdom, that Fjordell, who is kind of trying to take over all of the other kingdoms. It's kind of like a religious empire situation where they, even if they're not like in control officially, they are, because they control the religion and they control the governments in these other kingdoms. So we have that going on. So the reason Serene is coming to marry Raoden, she wants to try to form an alliance between Arlon and Teod to try to prevent this from happening. And that's all I'm going to say, because I went into this like not even knowing that, and I don't think you want to know anything else before you get into this book. You don't want to know. You just want to find out all of the surprises and all of the twists and turns and learn about these characters' personalities as you go. But this book made me cry several times because it does not shy away from the cruelty that the Elantrians are facing, both from their own bodies, like what is happening to them that they cannot control, but also the way that they're being treated, they're being shunned. And there's, I think, a lot of commentary in here about how people who are different, people who are helpless and can't care for themselves, can be treated by a society when there's this this narrative of them being like evil or diseased or, you know, whatever the case is, and it makes people afraid of them. And we see so many awful things happen to so many good people, so many innocent people sometimes. And this is not the same as All the Light We Cannot See. This one is not just going to leave you sobbing throughout the book. But there were times where I was definitely getting emotional and tearing up. And I'm like, seriously, why did this have to happen? This is... it just was very sad and very upsetting. But overall, I think this book is really lighthearted. So I almost hesitated to put it on this list. Or maybe lighthearted is not the word. But it is very political in a lot of ways. And I don't... like, the characters themselves are very easy to fall in love with and very easy to follow. And I think that does... maybe lighthearted isn't the word. But I think that does keep your spirits kind of uplifted in a way, because you are just following them, believing in them, and hoping for good things. But as I said, you do see these really sad moments that occur in Elantris to these people. And it is so sad. It's so sad. Those parts are very sad. So this one did make me cry a few times. But I think it's really, really good. And I think the ending was a great payoff. Like, this book was fantastic. And like I said, it wasn't me crying through the whole thing, because Raoden and Serene and their friends and their companions, I loved following them. I loved their perspectives. I think that they're amazing people. So I don't want to like give off the impression that this is a tragedy or like a sad book just to read all the way through. That's not what I mean. But as I said, I do get emotional when things happen to characters. So, this one did get me a few times, but it's really, really good. I cannot recommend it enough. This is not, like I said, one of those books that you're just going to cry your eyes out. But if you want a book that is very emotional and really makes you care about the characters and care what happens to them, and you do get emotional when things happen, while you also have this political scene playing out and these like machinations from all these characters, and it's very character focused, I think, even with all this political stuff in the background. And I love it. I'm so excited to move on to what else is in the Cosmere. But I'm so glad that this was the first one and that I started here, and I cannot recommend it enough. All right, so now we're going to move back into cry your eyes out territory. So I read this book. Let me just tell you the story for a second. Um, my cousin texted me and said that she and her sister were going to see the midnight premiere of the movie for this book that night. And they were like, "Do you want to come with us?" And I was like, "Absolutely, I do." But see, I hadn't read the book yet, and I'm the kind of person that I have to read the book before I can watch the adaptation. So I drove to Walmart, bought this book, read it in about 5 hours, and I spent the last 30 minutes of those 5 hours just bawling. And then, because apparently I enjoy pain, emotional pain, I went with my cousins to the midnight premiere and then I cried again. Like so. Um, that book is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. And I know that this is an older book, so some of you may have already read it or seen the movie. But I will say, if you've seen the movie and not read the book, I still recommend that you read the book because it's really good. Although this is a case where I do think the adaptation was just lovely and amazing and wonderful to watch. But if you have not heard of The Fault in Our Stars, we follow a girl named Hazel Grace Lancaster who has lung cancer. And she basically knows that it's probably going to be terminal. She's just kind of living with this. She's a teenager. And so her whole kind of life has revolved around going to treatments, going to the hospital. She's had it since she was like 12 or 13, I think. Um, and she doesn't go to school. She takes online college classes because she's very, very smart. And one day her mom convinces her to go to a support group for kids who have had cancer or are currently in remission, because she wants her to make some friends. And she meets a boy there named Augustus Waters. And Gus had cancer that resulted in the loss of his leg. And they bond. Gus is instantly smitten with Hazel. So this book is very much about their relationship. And oh boy, I mean, you can probably figure this is a book about teenagers with cancer. It's going to be very emotional. This book, what can I even say without spoiling what happens? I mean, obviously, you're seeing the struggles of these kids who are dealing with something that none of us ever want to deal with. And it's so heartbreaking just to see them having to be strong and having to deal with it and breaking down when they can't take it anymore. And Hazel and Gus have a friend Isaac, who the cancer that he has is in his eyes and it's affecting his sight. And he's dealing with the potential loss of his eyes, even. And then in the midst of it, you have these two kids who have fallen in love with one another, and they are trying to figure out how that's going to work when one of them knows that she has a terminal illness and the other one is in remission from a very similar illness, and they are trying to navigate this relationship. And when you get to like the second half of this book, this whole book is very emotional, but you also love these characters and you love seeing them bonding and dealing with these things together and seeing the love that people have for each other and the hope that they have even in the midst of such tragic pain. And it's so good. It's so good. And like I said, the second half of this book is going to hit you right where it hurts, but I don't want to spoil anything, but it's amazing. And it's all from Hazel's perspective, so you're really getting a very up close and personal look into her story and what it's like to be dealing with this cloud just hanging over your head all the time and trying to live your life in spite of that, right? Like not letting that take away the time and the joy that you have. And I love this book. It is young adult, so it is a YA book, but it's really good. I have seen the movie multiple times since then, and I will say, if you've had a loved one who has had cancer or who has passed away from cancer, it is going to potentially hit differently because both of my grandparents on my mom's side actually passed away from cancer. And watching the movie after that was definitely a different experience. It definitely hit a little harder. But so just do be aware of that. If that's something that is going to trigger you or make you uncomfortable, you know, be careful, right? Like take care of yourselves. But I do think that this book is very powerful. It's very good. I know that it's like a lot of people talk about this, I think, with like, oh yeah, that's the sad teenager book. But like, it's so good. It really, really is. I don't want to say enjoy, but I did enjoy it because I love the characters, but I also like it really got me. um, and my cousin and I showed the movie to her. Then he was her boyfriend. Now they're married. And he is the kind of person that he has to make comments throughout all the movies that he's watching. Like he has to engage with it. But as the movie went on, he got quieter and quieter and quieter, and he was crying too by the end. So I don't know if that recommends it more to you or makes you warier about it. But anyway, that is that one. All right, so the next book that I have here I actually read on the plane to Wyoming a few years ago, and then I think I finished it either while we were in Wyoming or on the plane back. Because honestly, when you're on vacation, you think you're going to have time to read sometimes, but most of the time you don't have any time to read. So I may have finished it on the plane ride back, but I love this book so much. And that is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. If you like Shakespeare and you like dark academia, here you go. This is the book for you. So in this book, we're following 7 students at a really, really fancy elite conservatory. They are studying Shakespeare. They are in the theater program. And we follow the perspective of a character named Oliver, who's one of those 7 students, those 7 friends. And at the beginning of the book, so there are time jumps in here. At the beginning of the book, Oliver is being released from jail for a murder that was committed 10 years ago. And the detective who had originally like been assigned this case has never really believed that the story that they told was true. So when Oliver is released, this detective has retired. He no longer has any power to convict anybody, and Oliver has served his time. So he goes to meet Oliver and asks him to tell him the story of what actually happened 10 years ago. So then, of course, we go back to the past, and we see this death of one of these students, one of this group of friends. From Oliver's perspective, we see him and these other students navigating their relationships. There is a lot of Shakespeare in here. So if you're a fan of Shakespeare, like I said, and you like academic settings and kind of like, I don't want to say pretentious, but some of the students in this group are very self-absorbed in ways. There are some toxic relationships in here, but ultimately, for the most part, these 7 kids really do care about each other. And seeing them deal with this death and this tragedy, and they all have character flaws, all 7 of them, let me just say that. They are not perfect. And they make some pretty terrible decisions throughout this book. But this book, it is so good, and it keeps you like on the edge of your seat. You want to just keep reading and keep reading. And the way that Oliver is telling the story, and we do occasionally go back to the present timeline with him and see what's going on with him being released and talking to Detective Colborne and reuniting with some of those people that he hasn't seen for so long while he's been in prison. It's, oh my gosh, it's so good. It is addicting, honestly. This book is addicting. But there are some scenes that did make me cry, and I literally can't say anything about them without spoiling some huge stuff in this book. There are also scenes in here that made me very angry because, like I said, these characters, including Oliver, make some terrible decisions, including relationship decisions. But the ending, especially like the last few chapters, I cried several times, tearing up, crying, just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And also, it's one of those endings where you're like, oh, this is happening. This is actually happening. And it was just, I don't know. And the way that the book actually ends, again, I can't say anything, but it was just like I want more, but at the same time, I think it's such a great ending, but like I want more. But it was so good. So again, this one is not one of those books that's going to have you crying and just sobbing your eyes out throughout the whole book. But it's not that kind of book. It's not intended to be. But there are moments in here that are just emotionally gut-wrenching, especially at the end. That's really where it made me cry. But again, maybe that's just because I'm an easy crier. Like I said, I get emotional. I get emotional very easily, either when bad things are happening to characters I love, or they are sad, or when there is just something that's so just like heartwarming, it almost makes me sad because I'm like, this is just so beautiful. I'm like, yeah, I cry easily. So maybe it's just me. Maybe other people don't cry at this book, but the ending of it, like I said, the last few chapters, they did get me. So, but I also just recommend it because I think that it is delightfully dark in some ways, but also just the aesthetic of this elite academic setting. These students studying Shakespeare and performing, and some of the relationships in here, I was just like, oh, I love you so much. Like, I want y'all to be happy. And then again, other ones, I'm like, this is completely messed up and toxic, and neither of you see that. You both think that you're making good choices, and they're not good choices. But I think that this book is really, really good. It is a dark academia book, so if that appeals to you, if you like dark academia, this one, I think, is kind of a classic. Lots of people have read it, lots of people have loved it, but just in case you haven't, I think that you should check it out. And if you have read it, please let me know if you cried at the end, because I want to make sure I'm not the only one who did. All right, I didn't do this on purpose. I just had them in alphabetical order, but I've noticed now that we're kind of alternating between sobfest and just like made me emotional. So now we're going to go back to just I cried so hard. And again, I cried mostly at the end of this. This one is also really, really popular. Lots of people have read it, but I've discovered recently that not as many people as I think have. Like, you see people on BookTube talk about this book a lot, or at least say that they've read it. But when I talk to people in my personal life, not a lot of people that I know have read it. So, just in case, and because it does fit the theme of this video, I've included it. But that is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Oh boy. Okay. So this is a reimagining, retelling of the story of Achilles and Patroclus from ancient Greek mythology. And y'all, oh, if you know the story, if you've read the Iliad, then you know how it ends. You know how their story ends. And so I thought I was prepared going into this, which was my first mistake because I should have been aware. I should have been self-aware and realized that it doesn't matter how many times I watch a movie or read a book. If it made me cry the first time, it's going to make me cry every time. So I should have known that this was going to break my heart. But if you've read the Iliad, you know how their story ends. So don't think that's going to prepare you, though, because this book is written from Patroclus's perspective, and we follow his and Achilles' relationship from the time that they are children all the way to that fateful end in the Battle of Troy. So, oh boy, this book, what can I say? Like I said, we start when Patroclus and Achilles are kids and when they first meet each other. And this book does take the route of Patroclus and Achilles having been in a romantic relationship with one another. So I know that there are a lot of interpretations of the relationship between these two people. That is the route that Madeline Miller takes. And it is beautiful. Their relationship is beautiful, although they are in a world and a situation where, unfortunately, I feel like if they had just been left alone to live their lives, their relationship would have been really lovely and healthy and beautiful. But they are, unfortunately, because of who Achilles is and who his mom is. So if you don't know, Achilles is a demigod. They're not left alone. And Patroclus has very low self-esteem because of some stuff that happened when he was a kid with his dad. And he doesn't really see himself very highly in a lot of moments in this book, but he sees Achilles as just beautiful and perfect. So we are getting this, like, we're seeing Achilles through the lens of Patroclus's eyes. So he's kind of blind to a lot of Achilles' faults. unfortunately. And I'm not one of those people. I've seen people read this book and like hate Achilles, and I am not. I think that Achilles, in a lot of ways, when I read this, I think he didn't always understand exactly what was going on because he was being pulled so hard in one direction by what his mom wanted of him. And she was saying all of these things to him that were really warping his opinions and his perspectives and kind of trying to influence his desires. So I really liked Achilles. I think that, again, if he and Patroclus had just been left alone and been allowed to be raised by Achilles' dad forever and go on to just live a normal life, they would have been really happy. But I still think that their relationship is beautiful, and it's so tragic. And I don't feel bad saying that because the story of the Iliad has literally been around for like thousands of years. So I don't feel bad saying that. But it is tragic. It's tragic. But again, if you've read the Iliad, you know where things go really wrong. And from that moment on, I just cried the whole time. It was just like, just crying, crying, crying. It was beautiful and wonderful and heartbreaking. And just, like I said, they're both flawed characters because of how they see themselves and how they see what their role in the world is. Like, obviously, Achilles believes that his role is, his mom wants him to become a god. So she wants him to put himself in these dangerous situations and prove his worth and accomplish something great, which is terrible parenting and ends up leading to the end of this book, which, as I said, this is a tragedy. But their relationship I still think is beautiful. I think that the ending of this book is so heartbreaking, and then it just there's also like depression in here, not wanting to, like, not seeing a point in continuing your life, like that kind of stuff. Again, if you know the story, you know what I'm talking about, but it's at the end of this. But it's just so beautiful, and it makes me cry so much. And if you want a book that is going to just be some of the most beautiful prose you've ever read, and one like a love story that you just wish ended differently, and like as you're reading it, even if you know the Iliad, you kind of forget. You kind of forget as you go how it's going to end until you get there and you're like, no, 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 no. So it made me cry so much, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. If you've seen like my bookshelf tours, you know I have multiple editions of this book, and in some of my book hauls I've gotten more editions recently, but I love it so much. It's so, so, so good. I don't think I'm doing a really good job describing it, but I can't recommend this book enough. I think that it is beautiful and heartbreaking. The prose is so lyrical and lovely, and again, it's from Patroclus's perspective, so you're getting a very close look into his head, and you're viewing everything through his lens, even at the end, because he can still see what's going on. And it's just so good. It's just so wonderful, and I love it. Even though it breaks my heart, I still love it so much. And so if you want to cry, you want a love story, it's going to make you cry, here you go. And you like Greek mythology, that's just icing on the cake there. All right, and then we have one more book to talk about today. I do want to say these are not nearly all of the books that have made me cry. There have been lots over the years. But these are just some that I wanted to kind of highlight today. And like I said, I wanted to have a mixture of things that made me cry in different ways, because some of these books are just like sad books. They're so beautiful, but they're so heartbreaking. And then some of them are not sad books, but there are moments that just hit me right in the heart. So that was kind of just what my goal for today. But the last one that we're going to talk about is another one that I've read recently. And again, I wouldn't say that this is a sad book. It's not. In fact, it's a murder mystery. But there were some moments in here that did get me. And I didn't like full on cry at this, but like tearing up, hand over the mouth, like, oh my gosh. So it's really good. And that is Voyage of the Damned by Frances White. I've actually talked about this in a video before, but this is a murder mystery fantasy book. It takes place on a ship. And I don't want to tell you too much because I went into this knowing very little. I thought I knew what I was getting into, and I really did not. And honestly, it was better than I anticipated. But Voyage of the Damned, we follow Ganymedes Pissarro. He is one of the heirs of it's 12, right? Yes, the 12 provinces of Concordia, which is this kingdom. Um, and each of the heirs of these 12 provinces, they possess this gift. They have this magical ability, and it is something that is passed down from parent to child. So that determines who is going to take over the province. And Ganymedes is one of these 12 heirs, but he is the only one who does not have a gift, and nobody knows this. And so the 12 heirs are going on this journey on the emperor's ship. And it's like this ceremonial journey that will, at the end, result in all 12 of them taking their places as the leader of their provinces. And the heir to the dragon province, she is going to become the next emperor or empress. And things go awry very quickly. Someone dies. Someone ends up dead. And Ganymedes takes it upon himself to try to figure out what is happening, why people are dying, who is killing them, what's going on. So that's literally all you need to know. And they're trapped on this boat. They can't get off. Okay? So it's just the 12 of them on this boat. That's it. So, what's happening? Because they're like, no one else is supposed to be here. Because the boat's magical. So there's no crew. So what's going on? That's literally all you need to know going into this. It is so good. Oh my gosh, I enjoyed this book so much, and I don't hear anyone talking about it, which could be because this is the Illumicrate edition. It's only just now coming out in the US, but still, it's so good. I flew through this book. I just ate it up. It is so fun, and again, this is another one where you are in the head of our main character. So this is all from Ganymedes' perspective. It's so good. But there are some twists in here that I was not expecting, and let me tell you, there were just some moments, like Ganymedes does not have a very high opinion of himself. He acts like he does. Lots of swagger, but inside, not so much. But there were a few moments that it really did just, like, emotionally. And some of it, it's not even because it's sad. Some of it was just because it was, like, just emotional. It was like, oh my gosh, like, things that another character is saying, you're like, oh, yes, yes, like, I don't know. I don't know what to say without spoiling it because, again, I don't want you to know much going into this. But this one, like I said, it's a murder mystery. It's not meant to be, like, super, super sad and for you to cry. That's not the point of this book. It's not a sad book. But there were moments that just made me cry strictly because they were emotional. And I was like, I want this to happen. I want these people to be happy. I want, like, realizing what's going on, hearing these characters say these things to each other, I was like, oh yes, like, and it just made me tear up, made me cry. So this one is different than the ones that I've said previously in this list that made me cry because of sad things. That's not really what this book did. It just made me cry because I was in some ways super, super happy, and in some ways I was just like, sometimes I don't know if this happens to other people as much as it does to me. But when you have those things that just really choke you up, those moments or those things that you hear people say, and sometimes it's just because it's so heartwarming and it makes you so happy, and then sometimes it's not really that it makes you happy, but it's like when you see someone reuniting with a family member who they haven't seen in forever. It's like a happy feeling, but it's, I don't know, or like when someone has really low self-worth and then someone else like makes them feel better, or you see someone who is sitting alone on their birthday and then someone goes and sits with them, like those types of moments. That's the same kind of feeling that made me cry in this book at certain moments. And again, most of it is just really fun. It's a murder mystery. You are also trying to figure out what's going on and what's happening, and it's just mostly really fun, but there were some moments like that where someone says something or does something that like just chokes you up, or at least it did to me. I don't know if it will for anyone else. Out of all the books on this list, I feel like this is probably the one that's least likely to make anybody else cry. But it did get me, so There you go, for whatever that's worth. All right, so those are a few standalone books that have made me cry, whether because they were sad, they were heartbreaking, they were tragic, or because bad things happened in them that just affected me emotionally, or because they just choked me up for whatever reason. So there are lots of reasons to cry at stories. And I partake in pretty much all of them. Like I said, it's very easy to make me cry. So this list may not have been what you expected, and I'm sorry if that's the case, but I would love to hear of any books that you've read that have made you cry, or if you've read any of these, please let me know if you cried or didn't. Just again, keep everything spoiler free in the comments, but I would love to hear what you have to say. Because I love seeing y'all's comments. I love getting to talk to you all in the comment section. And if you would like to leave an emoji, let's do. I don't really want to do the crying emoji. That's kind of sad. Let's do like a water droplet, for like a tear. So let's do like a water droplet emoji. If you want to leave one with your comment, or because you just want to leave a comment and you don't know what else to say, but you want to let me know that you were here, I would love to see it. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!